Hey guys, it's Dr. Hayes, and this is the introductory video for our children's and young adult or adolescent lit class. And so today I just wanted to kind of go over the beginnings of the textbook, the preface you had to read, and also we're going to talk about alphabets and children learning alphabets and the different ways they've done that throughout the years. So today's information is just sort of to set up the sort of beginnings of the way children were conceptualized and the kinds of things they read. And in class next time we will continue talking about different theories of education for children and the sort of books that have gone along with how children have been educated. And so we'll be able to continue those conversations. And in the next video after this, we will look at the chapbook industry and the way that commercial publications developed and what children were reading. So that's kind of some of the next few topics we're going to be talking about. So first off, I wanted to talk about how we're studying children's literature in this class. It's going to be kind of a history class, and it's going to be the history of, yes, children's literature and what children have been reading, but also the history of children themselves and how children have been thought of and conceptualized throughout history, specifically the last few hundred years, and how that has affected the kinds of things that they have available to read. And this is ideas we will be coming back to for the rest of the semester, but we're just getting started today. So the preface you read in your book talked about some early influential ideas of childhood and the early kinds of things children were able to read. So we're first going to talk about in this video ideas and conceptualizations of childhood, and then we will continue and talk about the first kinds of things that all children read, which are alphabet books and learning the alphabet. So let's start at the beginning with the way that children are thought of. So children used to be thought of as just miniature versions of adults. Like there wasn't a separate idea in adults' minds as like, oh, childhood is a separate time of development from adulthood. That's such a foreign concept to us now because developmental theory and different ideas and philosophies about how the life cycle takes place and how children develop that's just so natural to us because we living in a post psychological world where we understand the subconscious, we understand developmental phases in a person's life. That just was not a concept even just a few hundred years ago. And so children were thought of as just small versions of adults and were held accountable in that way. So they weren't there. It wasn't like there was books made just for children. They read whatever the adults were reading, sermons and essays and poetry and things like that. And the only reason that a child was thought of to even need to be literate was so that they could read the Bible and read the Lord's Prayer and be able to pray and become saved, right? So the time frame we're looking at here is sort of the emergence of maybe the Renaissance in England, which coincided with the colonial or Puritan times in America. So around that time is when literacy for young people was even being recognized as something that was necessary. Now, before that, with the aristocracy and the upper classes and royalty, obviously the young people were educated with languages and poetry and stuff like that from a very early age because of their title. But what I'm talking about is just on a more generalized scale that all people were becoming literate. There was an emphasis on everybody becoming literate at a certain age. So really where this starts is in like the 15 or 1600s when children were beginning to be recognized as a separate entity from adults, and that maybe we needed to think about how we interact with them a little bit differently. So some key factors in that were John Locke, who was a famous philosopher, and he is most famous. You've heard of the tabula rasa theory, the blank slate, right? I think his theories about the tabula rasa came out in the 1670s. I think maybe 1671 or 2. That's not important, but in the late 1670s is when John Locke had put forth his tabula rasa idea. And so that concept is basically that human beings, when we're born and, when we gain consciousness as a child, it's like a completely blank piece of paper, right? Or a slate, like a chalkboard, right? And so all the experiences that we have, all of the interactions that we have, the language we learn, the things we read, the people we meet, all of those things make marks on our slate that cannot be erased. And so we start off as, clean, and we still use that phrase today. Let's wipe the slate clean. Let's have a clean slate, right? Well, his theory was that we're born with a blank slate, and that all of our experiences serve to add to our slate, add to our personality. And depending on what kind of life you lead, that can be a negative experience or a positive. The experiences you have, the marks on your slate can besmirch you and make you sort of lose your innocence, or they can sort of enrich you and make you into a profitable, contributing member of society. And so that idea was very influential. Fast forward to, say, 100 years later, in the 1770s, when we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was writing, he was a French philosopher and very influential on the French Revolution, but he published a treatise on education. It's considered to be one of the first sort of completely realized philosophical treatises on how education should work. And he was very much influenced by this blank slate idea. And he put forth this reform on how he thought education should be. And it was very much influenced by childhood is this innocent time that needs to be set apart and needs to be, everything that a child reads needs to be carefully guarded. In fact, he said the only book that a child had any business reading, besides maybe the Bible and things like that, was Robinson Crusoe, which was, I think, came out 1741. It's considered to be the first official novel. It's the first novel, Robinson Crusoe. Novels weren't really a thing before that. And so he thought, oh, that's all a kid needs. And so he had these ideas about setting a child apart and very strictly protecting and censoring what they were exposed to, the experiences they saw and read about and heard about, and just sort of protecting them as long as you could, because their sort of natural state. He had this idea that man was born into this natural state, and everything. I think that's the opening of that. The opening line of that education, which is on education, is everything that comes from the author is pure and innocent, and then society is corrupted by society. So his idea was that the longer and more interaction that a human had with other humans, they were going to get more and more corrupt and less innocent. And so he had all these ideas about teaching kids in isolation and preserving their natural goodness as long as possible. And it was very influential on how education for a while, and even maybe still, is happening. So those are a couple philosophers that were very influential. That leads us into the Romantic era. So if you've studied British literature at all, you're familiar with the Romantics. It was a group of poets in the late 1700s and early 1800s who sort of revolutionized the idea of nature, experiencing beauty, and the purity of like beauty in nature. And the big names were like Wordsworth and Coleridge and Keats, and you've heard these. William Blake was one of the early ones. You've heard these names probably before. Well, William Wordsworth specifically had very influential ideas about childhood innocence, right? And so because of his ideas about childhood innocence as this, childhood as this time that needs to be set apart, right? It needs to be set apart as protected, and it's so fleeting and it's so easily ruined, right? So that children after the Romantic era were almost worshipped as these sort of pure, angelic creatures from heaven. And so the idea of the romantic child came about. And it's still something, this idea of this romantic child, this innocent, pure being that needs to be protected. And then when that's lost, it's sort of a mournful thing. We still think of children in that way. That's how influential it was. We're talking about the first decade or two of the 1800s is when this idea came about. And it's still influencing. It has influenced how the education system developed, how it still works, how parenting theories still work, how children's literature publications still happen. We're still very much influenced by this romantic child idea. And so I can't really emphasize enough how important of an idea that is. Right, so that influenced everything after that, even politically with child labor laws when we got into the industrialization and things like that. So those are some of the major ideas that went along. We had 1600s, we had the blank slate. Late 1700s, we had Rousseau expanding on that and applying it to education. And then early 1800s, we had Wordsworth and the Romantics applying it to childhood in general. So the result of the idea of the romantic child is that adults started to recognize their loss, the loss of their own childhood, started to recognize the loss of their own innocence. So childhood began to be looked back on in a retrospective way, as with a lot of nostalgia, with a lot of sort of mournful melancholy about what has been lost. There's nothing that you can get back. And that became a theme in children's literature, and it still is. It's still a theme of the loss of childhood, the loss of childhood innocence. You can think back with like, Peter Pan and, the loss of boyhood and when the Lost Boys grow up, when Wendy grows up, even before that with like Little Women, when the girls grow up and they don't play games anymore. They're too old for things. So there's this theme in children's literature about being too old and losing your innocence and losing that wonder. Fast forward to, the 1950s with the Chronicles of Narnia. Once the children get too old, they can't go to Narnia anymore. We have that now with the Polar Express. If you can't hear the bell, if you don't believe, you can't hear the bell and you can't, go to the North Pole. So, becoming too old and too mature to participate in the wonders of childhood is a recurring theme in children's literature. So, and this all goes back to this idea of this romantic child in the beginning of the 1800s. So that's some philosophical ways we've thought about children. So I want to kind of talk about how those ideas have influenced the commercial field of children's literature. So as I was saying, the beginning of children's literature, there wasn't such a thing. Children were reading Robinson Crusoe or Gulliver's Travels or things that were not necessarily written for children, but that children enjoyed, right? And so there wasn't anything that was being created specifically for them. The exception would be educational texts like alphabet books and school books and things, which we'll talk about in class next time as our, an in-class lesson about the New England Primer and the Little Pretty Pocketbook and things like that. But other than these educational texts, there wasn't literature, like books being published for children. So when that changed, the way the children's literature scholars, what we determined to be the beginning, it's really hard to just say this is when we started having children's lit, but we have to label it somehow. So the beginning of the commercial field of children's literature is 1744 with John Newbery's Little Pretty Pocketbook, which we're going to talk about in class next time. So I won't go into too much detail about it here, but it was a little book with poems and stories and things, and it was the first book that was specifically commercially marketed, created for and marketed toward children. Not just children, but like families as well. Just, parents and children reading it together, or their governesses or nannies reading it to the children. So this was the first sort of commercially produced book for children, and it came with a little toy. It came with a little ball that was like a toy that the child could play with. So we still have books now. Like when you get a book, there's merchandise that goes with them. You can get the little characters as stuffed animals, or decorations for your room, or little toys or whatever to go with the book. So we still do that now, and he was kind of the first to start that and to think of things that children were going to read as a commodifiable product. And so we consider that to be the beginning of children's literature, because it was the first time that a book was commercially marketed to a child. After that, there was several other titles, little illustrated alphabets and picture books, and mostly still very educational books. The other thing that was really unique about Little Pretty Pocketbook too is that up until then, pretty much all books that children were given to read, if it wasn't just the alphabet, it was very spiritual, like religious. It was learning how to pray or learning stories about the Bible or something like that. But Little Pretty Pocketbook was the first one. It was very moralistic, and a term that we use in children's lit, it was didactic, meaning it was preachy is the connotation of that. It was a preachy book, but it wasn't religious, so to speak, associated with a specific denomination or anything like that. So that was a kind of a big change as well. So that's why we start with Newbery's Pretty Little Pocketbook, and we'll talk about that next time. So the industry sort of kept going from there, and it was ushered in eventually with the commercial emergence of children's lit in 1744, the Romantic Child in the early 1800s. So by the mid 1800s, also with the advancement of technology and publishing and printing technology from industrialization, we had a full-on boon of children's literature that in the industry, in the field, we call the Golden Age. That's what is referred to, the Golden Age of children's literature, which officially started in 1865 with Alice in Wonderland. Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland in 1865 was officially the kickoff of a golden age, when there was just a major sort of explosion of books for children, commercially marketed to them, and developed for their entertainment. That's the key right there. That's why Alice in Wonderland is the pivot point, because there had been books being made for children for over 100 years. But they were very sort of enriching and educational, very moralistic. Whereas Alice in Wonderland is sort of the first massively popular and commercially successful book that was intentionally created to entertain a child reader, right? It had a child reader, Alice Little. She was a little girl. Charles Dodgson, who is Lewis Carroll, he wrote it for her. And so he had a child reader in mind, and his goal was to entertain her. this was a new sort of novel concept of like, oh, we can write something and a child will read it just because to entertain them, and they don't have to learn anything. They don't have to learn a lesson. They don't have to be taught a moral code. They can just think it's funny. They can think it's silly. He made fun of her teachers. He made fun of, the adults in her world, and it was silly, and there was lots of wordplay. And when we'll get to Alice in Wonderland later in the class, and we can talk more about that. But Alice is sort of the start of the Golden Age, and it ushered in. We have a whole unit about the Golden Age later in the semester, and pretty soon coming up in the semester, and we'll talk more about the Golden Age when we get to that. But a lot of recognizable foundational texts that we think of as classic children's literature is from the Golden Age. And it went all the way up until, really it ended with the World Wars. Because we had World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, pretty much in close succession. And that sort of put a big wet blanket on this Golden Age of children's literature and fundamentally changed the psychological landscape of most of the world. And so the kinds of things that children were reading and the kinds of children that were growing up were different. And so later on we'll get to those units in our class with the issues novels from the 60s and sort of the emergence of the idea of adolescence and teen lit after that. So we'll kind of talk about those things later on in the semester, the things that happened after the Golden Age. So I guess that's all about sort of the history, like of how children were conceived of or, conceptualized, and how books for them change as a result. When we talk about the Little Pretty Pocketbook in the primer in class next time, we'll talk more about education and education reform specifically. So I won't go over that now. But there's one other thing I will one other conception of childhood that I'll go over to lead us into talking about alphabets. And this is kind of how we'll start talking about alphabets. So I had mentioned that the emphasis on literature for young people really got going in maybe the late early 1600s, around the same time as the Elizabethan era and the Renaissance in England and the colonial Puritan period in America. And the reason for that was a spiritual one. And I had mentioned this earlier. Children were taught to read because they needed to learn how to read the Bible, because they had to learn how to read the Bible so that they could memorize the Lord's Prayer, so that they could pray and get saved, so that in case they died, their soul wouldn't go to hell. There was a lot of fear of children being born into original sin and dying early and going to hell because they didn't know how to pray and be saved. So there was a lot of sort of concern about that from the parents of children once those ideas, those Puritan ideas, and the sort of the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation in England and all, like a priest couldn't just, you're saved. You had to make the decision to accept Christ. So there became an increased emphasis on early literacy so that children could get saved and go to heaven. This was a real concern because a lot of children died young. Like, it wasn't uncommon for a family to lose at least one or more, 2 or 3 children in childhood before they came of age. And so that's why Christianity specifically came up with the the age of responsibility or whatever, but you reach a certain age of accountability, where you reach a certain age where you if you're younger than that, you get a free pass to heaven because you don't know any better. You can't be saved. But once you reach this age of accountability where you can logically make the decision to accept or deny Christ, then you're responsible for your own soul and you could go to heaven or hell. So there was this panic in Protestant families about educating their children as early as they could so that they could make that choice to say the Lord's Prayer and be saved so that they wouldn't go to hell if they died as a kid, because a lot of kids did die. It's very morbid when you think about it like that. So a lot of the stuff that kids were reading was really heavy-handed in the spiritually imparting these truths to the children. Some of it was morbid and heavy-handed in that way. And so that's the dawn of the idea of the romantic child changed that a little bit, because the concept, it was a complete opposite concept. The Protestant concept is you're born with original sin. You're born evil. You're born sort of fouled up, tainted with sin, and then you have to become saved. The Romantics thought, no, you're born pure and innocent and, close to heaven, and then the more you're on earth, you're tainted and fouled up and corrupted and with sin. And so you have to preserve your innocence. It's something you have and then lose, not something you are born without and then gain through salvation. So there's a little bit of a conflict there. And the Romantics did think that it happened in two ways. Either you were born straight from heaven and you were purely innocent, like an angelic, or you had another sort of offshoot of the Romantics who thought that the romantic child they looked at it more of as a natural thing. Like you were born like almost in a feral beast state, like one with nature, and you had to be civilized by your interactions with society. And so, I mean, they both had the same concept of being born completely blank or in sort of this natural state, and then society influenced you, but they had different ideas of how that happened. But anyway, that's why there was such an emphasis on literacy for young people starting in the 1600s. And that resulted in a lot of educational reform and things like that we'll talk about in class next time. But the great equalizer, the thing that no matter if you're rich or poor, what color your skin is, what language you're learning, really, anything, no matter what, the great equalizer is the alphabet. Whatever alphabet happens to be the language you're learning. Everybody has to start there. Everybody has to learn the letters. You have to learn the letters, what they look like, what sounds they make. You might even be learning how to write them, but at this time, learning to read did not necessarily go with learning to write. There were plenty of people, especially middle and lower classes, who learned to read, but they had no reason to write. There were clerks and scholars and various people who that's their job was to learn to write. There was plenty of people who were literate as far as being able to read, but they couldn't actually write anything. They never learned to make the shapes and write. They could just read, which is such a weird concept to us now, but it used to be a thing. So, learning the alphabet was the first step. So that's what we're going to focus on for the rest of this lesson. And so I've got some pictures I'm going to show you of some early alphabets, and you have some in your textbook, some excerpts of some early alphabets. And then I've got a stack here of some, I like to collect alphabet books. I have several that I think are kind of cool. So I'm going to show you some pictures on the computer, and then I'll show you some of my books, and we'll talk about different kinds of ways that the alphabet has been taught. Okay, so the earliest example we have, well, your book mentions a Latin alphabet. Comenius had this Latin alphabet book. This picture, it had little pictures with Latin words. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that because we're focusing on, English children's literature. And the people who would have learned with Comenius's Latin alphabet were upper class boys would have been taught with that. But it is sort of officially the first alphabet book, the first picture book, if you want to go that far, that kids had, because it had little woodcut pictures and a letter but it was in Latin. But what we're going to start with is the horn book. So I'm going to attempt to do something here. Let me do this. Hopefully you can see the horn book here. The horn book was an alphabet, and it was on a sheet of parchment, and it was attached to a board, and it had the alphabet on it. The reason it was called a horn book is because it had of clear horn or, mica or whatever that was over it. And I can move me. Yes. And so you can kind of see here the alphabet, and it had the letters in upper E-I-O-U, and then it had the Lord's Prayer. That's pretty much horn. I will point out, I don't know if you can see at the beginning of the alphabet right here, it has a cross called the crisscross row, the Christ cross row. Your book talks about this. And so teachers would recite the Christ cross row or whatever. I want to mention in England, the row, in New England, Puritans, they didn't like the symbol of the cross. They did not do crucifixes. They did not do crosses at all. So ones from New England, without the cross. It was very similar. It just wouldn't have a cross on it. I'll see if I can pull one up. Yeah, here's one. That looks like it might, I don't know, that might be a cross right there. But you can kind of see. Oh, and one thing I wanted to point out is they usually had a hole down on the handle. There was a hole there because it could you would tie a string, and it would, children could tie it onto their belt or their pants or whatever, and they could carry it with them to school. The other thing about the horn book is that it was used for discipline as well. Teachers could paddle you with it if you weren't behaving. It was useful in lots of ways. The horn book was. But, so that's kind of the beginning. We even have a magazine in Children's Lit now to review. It's a book review magazine for children's and young adult lit called The Horn Book, and it's Horn Book Magazine, and it's inspired by these sort of early alphabets. Sometimes these alphabets were made out of gingerbread. You would make an alphabet, and it would be like a cookie, and it would be perforated, and each one would be stamped with a letter of the alphabet. And it was an incentive to learn the alphabet because the kids, they would be allowed, if they could say the letter on the tile, they could bite that letter off or break it and eat that. So if they could recognize that letter, they got to eat the cookie, the little square of cookie, if they could recognize the letter. So it was an incentive to learn. So that was one way. But the whole emphasis here is on memorization. That's what school consisted of. Was memorizing these letters, memorizing the letter. And so, kids as early as like 2 and 3, they would, go to school, and they would basically just recite the crisscross row all day, backwards and forwards. And if they didn't get it right, they would be smacked. Sometimes like their hand would be smacked, or they would be hit with their horn book, and it was very much a negative reinforcement with that. Sometimes the positive reinforcement with the gingerbread version, depending on the generosity of who was teaching you. And then in America, especially, we had dame schools where the little kids would go and they would be taught their horn book by like a woman in the town whose children were old and out of the house. And so she would have a few children who would come and stay with her all day, and she'd mind them and watch them and teach them their letters and things like that. That's how schooling happened. It was like preschool, I guess. It's what you'd call it. We also in America had one-room schoolhouses where, you'd have all the grades in the same room, and some of the older students would be teaching the younger students the alphabet and their letters and using the horn book for that. So it was pretty rudimentary as far as what was available. We're talking about colonial times and 16 and then 1700s is when this was happening. So the horn book was sort of this early version of of learning the alphabet. And so the goal was to learn the alphabet so that you could read that Lord's Prayer and understand about your own mortality and get saved. That was what they had to read, right? So after that, I'm going to try to do this. The next evolution of alphabet books was something called battledores, which were these little, it's like a cardboard pamphlet. So you can kind of see right here, see if I can open this one up. It was like a cardstock, like a heart, and sometimes like covered in wax so that it was, you know, sturdier. And, yeah, I'm trying to do this. And so it would fold up. You can kind of see there's one here in the middle where, this flap is folded over. And it would be printed on both sides with, like a woodcut or pictures, and had the alphabet on it, and it had little pictures on it, and very rudimentary, but it was like the first little like book that they would have. And a lot of times these woodcuts were very low quality because it was essentially what the printer had left. So a lot of times the little woodcut didn't have anything to do with like the text that was on the little sheet. Like it'll be a little poem or story, but the picture wouldn't have anything to do with it. Because a woodcut is where they have the little, like a block of wood, and there's a picture carved in it, and then they stamp it in ink and then do it on the paper so that they can reproduce the same picture over and over. And, you know, so a lot of these little woodcuts were low quality and didn't really go with anything. But this battledore was sort of the next evolution of alphabet book. After that, I wanted to talk about... Let me see this one. Yes. Okay. So we're going to talk about the New England Primer next week. But I wanted to show you a picture from the New England Primer. The New England Primer, educational book that came out in the late 1600s. 1689 was the first one, and it was very important. It continued all the way up through into the, you know, early to mid 1800s. So for, you know, over about 150 years, it was the textbook on class. But I wanted to show you, this is of the alphabet that in New England Primer, and it is, so I wanted to show you an example because it is an example of how, moralistic and spiritual it was, and the emphasis was on your mortal soul. So this was an alphabet that had the sort of letters went along with characters from the Bible. Some of them are pretty normal, like Noah did the world anew, right? It was about Noah. You have Queen Esther. Let's see. I can't even read what that says. The Ruth left all for truth, right? So you have these characters from the Bible, and so you can learn the letter. Young Sphere. However, you have some, and so the emphasis on mortality, where it's like Xerxes did die, and so must I, right? Like, oh no, there's a right. Kind of morbid too. While youth do cheer, death may be near. Okay, so you're young, having a good time, but death may be near, right? So there was no shying away in these older alphabets from sort of controversial material, the subject matter that the children were needing to look at. It wasn't, we think of appropriate content for children now, but that wasn't really necessarily a concern back then. So this entertains me. The pictures pulled up that I want to show you. So in, I think the 1800s, maybe 1820 is where this next one comes from. Let me see if it'll open on my computer. Yeah, so the A was an archer. 1843 is where this one was from. So I was wrong with that. I'm trying to zoom in a little bit. So A was an archer is a famous alphabet for children. This might not even be the first edition of it. I think you have copies of this in your text. Some pictures from A was an archer. But this is a great example of how content for children has changed. So there was each letter is a person, has an identity, a character, if you will. So A was an archer, and shoots at a frog. B was a butcher and had a great dog. C was a captain all covered with lace. And then we have D was a drunkard and had a red face. Like, you wouldn't have a character in an alphabet book now that's a drunkard, right? That just wouldn't be something that you worry about. Which, this is funny because 1843 is well past the romantic child idea. So it shows you that it wasn't completely catching on yet, and maybe all of the circles that it was still a transitional period between, oh, children need to be protected, and they're fine, and this is a drunkard. All kids know what drunkards are. That's what a good one for D, right? The next picture is kind of funny too. I have a screenshot from, I need to move my camera. You have, it has a hangman. That R was a robber, you see, right? Like, so the R is, yeah, it's a dead body, like hanging from a hangman's noose. Again, you have pages of this in your text if you want to look at it more closely. But yeah, so we still have some content. There was, we weren't quite moved away completely protecting children from interesting, questionable content at this point yet. Brings up an interesting, take a break here and talk about. So in children's literature, in any literature, there's sort of three categories of things that you look at whenever you're analyzing literature, and you look at who the creator, so the author, who created the text, what the text is about, so the content of the text, and who is the text for, the audience of the text. So children's literature is the only genre of literature where the creators of the text are also the intended audience of the text. You don't have children writing children's literature. And I say this in classes before, and I've said this before, but there are examples like S.E. Hinton, who wrote The Outsiders, was 15 when she wrote that. And Christopher Paolini, who wrote Aragon, he was 15 when he started that series. And you sometimes have children's books where it's a collaboration between a kid and their parent, like the kid draws the pictures and the parent writes the text or something like that. But for the most part, the people who are creating the texts, the people who are intended to be reading the texts. So that has to sort of influence the lens through which you read this. You have adults creating the text, and they are looking back on childhood as this sort of nostalgic, innocent time that they have lost. And we'll talk about this more when we read Peter Pan, and when we read Winnie the Pooh, and things like that. So I won't go too much into the loss of childhood right now, but those are some key things as far as analyzing children's literature. But also the content, that second item, what is the text about? The alphabets really bring that out as far as it shows you, like, oh, there's a hangman there, there's a drunkard with a red face, and that's something that as we go throughout the semester, we'll be looking at, like, what makes this for children, content-wise. Content doesn't necessarily even have to refer to questionable inappropriateness. It can even refer to vocabulary that is maybe more elevated than you'd think a child could understand, or references to political context or socio-historical context that a child wouldn't grasp. And so the content is something that's interesting in children's literature, as far as, like, what makes this appropriate or inappropriate for a child, whether it be they can understand it or not, the vocabulary, whether it's morally inappropriate or appropriate. And again, that idea of the romantic child dictates that, like, what is appropriate for a child to be reading. And as you can see from the alphabet I just showed you, that was kind of a questionable transition, right, of what it was perfectly fine. Xerxes must die, and Xerxes did die, and so must die. And R is a robber who hung you did see. So we were kind of, it took a while to sort of move away from, now you'd never see that. But we even have transitions now. If you watch cartoons from, like, the 60s and 70s, there were racial stereotypes, there were characters who had cigars and beer and would get drunk and things like that. But now you would never have a children's show showing someone drinking or smoking or using racial slurs or anything like that. So we're going more intense with monitoring the content of children's literature now. So anyway, that was a little digression because of that. There's one more picture on here I wanted to show. You had this in your book, but I wanted to show it to you in color. Was Kate Greenaway's A Apple Pie. You have some, like I said, some black and white, but this was a very famous, well-known, mid to late 1800s, alphabet. And so I wanted you to see, because she's specifically known for her colors, her use of color, and how, just sort of idyllic, her illustrations look. And I wanted you to look up close. I'm trying to open one. We'll see if it opens for me. It wasn't cooperating a while ago. But the children in her books are all very genteel. They are dressed in upper class. They have bonnets. They have pretty dresses and ribbons. So this very sort of upper middle class Victorian. Here we go. And so, oh, whoops, I didn't do it. So it's sort of this indicator of children and family. Children's Lit was created for. Here we go. And so, we're talking about, the emphasis on literacy and how it was for more people than just aristocracy. Yes, that's true. But I do want to be clear. We're still talking about white, middle to upper class, right? The lower classes were still not being educated. They maybe would learn enough of, they would learn the alphabet and they would learn the horn book and they would learn, they'd memorize the Lord's Prayer. But that was, there wasn't literacy beyond that. So we're still looking at people who would actually have a book, they would have a book and they would be able to look at it and read it. And especially one in color with illustrations. That was very much a white middle class to upper class and upper middle class. Because it was still a luxury. Now, with the advancements in printing technology, that would change, with the golden age, which we'll talk about when we get to the golden age. But I just wanted to kind of put an asterisk there that we're still looking at, white, white, middle, upper class. It was illegal still at this point for anyone who wasn't white, people of color, to learn how to read. So I just wanted to put that out there. Okay, so I have a few other books to show you. It won't be long, but I wanted to show you examples of alphabet books, and kind of where it has come. So let's see. I will show you. I have this one, ABC. This is kind of or ABQ is what this is called. It's kind of just a example of a classic picture book, and it has the characters from the Bible, and it has little stories about them, and it has so this is more of a spiritual religious, so it's kind of a callback to the ones from the primer and things like that. So this is an example of a more modern version of the religious alphabets from the primer. I also have this other book. It's sort of a typical ABC. It's a whole series. And it's these, I don't know, you might have seen this, the letter characters. It's like little kids. And each one is a letter. And so this first book sort of introduces all the characters and sets up the premise that each little letter is a character, and there's lots of vocabulary that goes with each letter. And then each letter has their own book. And that little kid goes through the book with their, learning words that start with that letter. And they learn the long vowel sound, the short vowel sound, and, things that are, capitalized and not capitalized. And then there's a whole thing, a whole story that goes along with the words from that letter. So I don't have all of them. I have several of them, probably about half the alphabet that I've tracked down, over the years. I don't have them all. But yeah, that's an interesting and neat. Oh, and then here's the end papers have all the characters in them, so you can kind of see. And so each book, this is E, So this book is about this little guy. But then each little character has their own book. So what was the date on these? 1984. So this was something from the 80s, and up into the 90s is when those are being published. Before I show you just a few other examples, I wanted to use this book right here as an example to tell you quickly about alphabet picture book theory, like alphabet theory. So there is a famous, well-known, respected picture book scholar named Perry Nodelman. We'll talk about him again. But he has a book, a very influential scholarly textbook called Words About Pictures. And in that, there's a whole chapter about alphabet picture books and how sort of wild it is that anyone can learn the alphabet from an alphabet picture book. And this book I always like to use as a great example of what I mean by that. So if you're young enough to be learning the alphabet from a book like this with objects in pictures like this, then you're still young enough to be learning about the world itself, right? And so he talks about the sort of cultural iconography that these alphabet books have created. Like we think of A for apple and B for either ball or bear or something like that, and T for train and different things. And he talks about how somehow we just know, like, if this is we show a picture of a kid, a picture of a ball, and it says B for ball, they know that a picture is not, the word ball does not describe the picture they're looking at. Like a piece of paper with drawing on it is not called ball, right? The item being represented 2D on the piece of paper is a representation of an object that the word ball means, right? So it's kind of hard to think about, but usually the idea with picture books is the more detailed the representative picture is, the harder it is for the child or the learner of the language to conceptualize. So if you show to a kid, a picture of a tree, like a real tree that's like gnarled and bark and the branches and the leaves and everything, it's too much. But if you drew like brown trunk, green, like a green blob, maybe a couple of red dots, maybe a black hole in the trunk, that's a tree. We recognize that's a tree, right? And so this book is really interesting about it. So like this is a bear, but it's a teddy bear. This is not what a real bear looks like. So that's an example. So this first page, A is for apple and B is for bear. So if a young person was learning the world from this book, they would think that apples are the size of the head and torso of a bear. Or even a teddy bear at the most. So if you take a teddy bear, if you're going to have an apple, it's going to be like this big. Because it's the size of a teddy bear, right? And it's completely floating in space with no frame of reference about, so it's just bonkers about how we learn about spatial awareness and everything. Same thing here. Cars are the size, or ducks, you could say, are the size of a car, right? Because they're side by side and they're represented spatially next to each other. So they're about the same size. That's just so interesting to me. Same thing with this elephant and this flower. Either elephants are tiny or flowers are ginormous, right? So I feel like there was a couple. Oh yeah, I wanted to get to train. So we have T is for train. You've got a toy train here. This is not what trains look like. So if a child had been taught their alphabet and they'd been taught basic vocabulary words from a book like this, they're like, oh yeah, I know what a train looks like. Then if they ever actually saw a train out in the world, they wouldn't recognize it. Like, that's not a train. Trains now, if you think about the last time you saw a train crossing the tracks, it doesn't look like this. But when we hear the word train, we think the wheels, the little house, and then the big sort of smokestack. That's what we think of, right? The Thomas the Tank Engine and these sort of cartoony trains. Anytime there's a toy train, that's what it looks like. So how does that help? There's in children's lit too. We have the same sort of concept of a school. So if I say school, say picture a school. Well, it's very likely that you, or especially if you're a small child, you would picture a red building with a tower with a bell in it. That's what a school is. But I guarantee you, none of you attended a school that looked like that. And probably most of you have never even seen a school that looks like that. But somehow that's what we've been sort of conditioned to think. And so Perry Nodelman talks about how alphabet books have played a significant cultural role in establishing these sort of cultural icons in our minds because of the sort of standard images of like the train and the car and the apple and everything that we're given in alphabet books. Fascinating stuff. If that's something you're interested in, I can refer you to more scholarship about that. But that's just an interesting thing to think about with alphabet books. Here's just a couple cool novelty picture books that I have. Here's one about Tennessee. T is for Tennessee, and it's all Tennessee stuff. Things about Tennessee. One that's interesting is you have UT and the Vols on the same page. UT Vols and Vanderbilt, I should say. Vanderbilt and UT on the same page as for UNV. I thought that was kind of clever. So that's the thing from Tennessee. Here's one that's Neil Gaiman, which if you're a literature fan, you know Neil Gaiman wrote Coraline and American Gods and The Graveyard Book and all kind of good books that Stardust is another one. But he had this, The Dangerous Alphabet that he wrote. He didn't illustrate it, but the illustrations are pretty gruesome as far as, it's real kind of horror illustrations. And the alphabet is really goes with it. P is for piracy, blunt or discreet. Q is for quiet, bar one muffled scream. R is a river that flows like a dream. S is for somewhere, a skull and its smile. T is for treasure heaped into a pile. So, it's sort of this dangerous alphabet. I think that Neil Gaiman was directly inspired for that by the OG creepy guy, Edward Gorey. So Edward Gorey has a very distinctive style. He illustrated and wrote several books, like children's books, but he's sort of known as like the Mr. Creepy. And so this one, the Ghastly Crumb Tinies, is an alphabet book. And it's all about ways that kids have died. And so it's kind of gruesome. So you can kind of see E is for Ernest, who choked on a peach. And then F is for Fanny, soaked dry by a leech. So it's all about little kids and the ways they died. This one is really... K is for Kate, who was struck with an axe. Look at that. Gruesome. L is for Leo, who swallowed some tacks. It's kind of hard to see. Trying to get my camera to... There we go. Yeah, so Edward Gorey, this is from, I think the 60s, the 1960s. Yeah, the 1960s is when this came out. But yeah, I have a few things by Edward Gorey. But I think Neil Gaiman was directly influenced by Edward Gorey because his Dangerous Alphabet is very similar in its kind of creepiness to Edward Gorey. There's a... this is like a girly alphabet book that I found, the 26 Princesses. And so like each letter, 26 letters, each letter is a different princess, right? And they have like they interact and they're each named a letter from the alphabet. Pearl and Quinn and then there's like a description of them that rhymes. So that one's kind of neat if you have like a girly, I also have the ABCU Later with the Ugly Dolls. There was an Ugly Dolls movie a couple years ago with them, but the Ugly Dolls have been putting out books for a long time. And this one's really funny. This one's more for like I think the adults would enjoy it. And so the pages, it's kind of a little mini narratives on each page. So it's like G is for gravity, H is for hard because he hits the ground, right over here. I is for infirmary, and so it all goes together. Let's see. I'm trying to find another page that's good. But it's like little. Oh yeah. U is for umbrella. V is for ventilated, because it has holes. W is for wet, because it didn't protect him. So yeah, this little book is really cute. I like that. Here's another one, the Alphabet Family. This one is just really beautiful as far as the art in it. Oh, well. So this is beautiful. I went to like a black page. That's really funny. But no, the illustration style of this one is real artistic. And all the letters are they're a little bit more abstract. You know, there's a narrative as they go through it. And it's real artsy. Even like the front that has like an A it's an easel. He has like a little paintbrush. So the emphasis is very artsy. I also have, this is a classic ABC Look at Me. And each letter is an emotion. And it's a picture that goes with emotion. This is classic sort of emotional training, emotion recognition, mood recognition. That's a classic developmental training for children. So this book combines the two, where it's mood recognition on the faces of the kids, and then the picture describes the mood. So this is sort of a classic book, ABC Look at Me, with the moods. And the last one I want to talk about is the grandfather of all, the best one ever, which is, Dr. Seuss. This is not the last time that we will talk about Dr. Seuss in a class. When we do picture books, we'll talk about him again, and I'm sure Dr. Seuss will come up. But his ABC is, very influential. And again, like I said, we'll talk about Dr. Seuss again. But he was sort of well known for. I'm trying to see what year this was. I totally forget. 1963? That's around the same time as Edward Gorey. It's a classic Dr. Seuss style. I think you have some screenshots or pictures of this in your textbook as well. But I definitely wanted to mention it. O is very useful. You use it when you say, Oscar's only ostrich oiled an orange owl today. That is quite a lot of O's in that sentence. He was a master of just making an understandable sentence out of a seemingly nonsense string of words. So I couldn't talk about alphabets without talking about Dr. Seuss's ABC. So anyway, that's just a sampling. That's obviously not all the alphabet books there are. There's lots. I like interesting, cool alphabet books. So I have several. Of different themes, but the point is the alphabet book is the first book that everybody has to read, so that's why we're starting there, and that's why it was kind of the first lesson. The first lesson of the semester was alphabets, because it's the earliest picture book. It's the earliest children's book, I should say, from the horn book, the little sheet, to the little battledore pages, to the little woodcut alphabets in the primer, all the way up through. That's one of the things too. It's the most enduring style of children's literature. There are still alphabet books that come out now. Like every year there's some. There's alphabet books. There's lots more than what I have. Every year there's new alphabet books. And you think, how can we keep having, why do we need more alphabet books? The alphabet hasn't changed. The way we learn it has changed very little. But there's just something about it. I have another one it's on a show I forgot to pull out, and it's Star Wars. It's like all the letters are things from Star Wars. It's in a different shelf. I didn't pull it out. But anyway, so there's lots. There's themes. There's an alphabet book that they can go with pretty much any subject. So I'm fascinated by their endurance. It's the first children's book we have, and it's still a popular style of children's book today is alphabets, because like I said, it's the great equalizer. We all have to learn the alphabet first before we can do anything else with learning. We have to learn our alphabet and start there. So hopefully that was some interesting history for you. And if you have questions about it or anything, we can talk about that in class, or you can reach out with questions. But our next lesson in class will be the New England Primer and Little Pretty Pocketbook and educational texts. And then we'll move on, from there, and talk about some of these early kinds of texts and early things that children were reading. But until then, y'all have a good rest of your day, and I will talk to you later.